The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes? Greetings. I am Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer of the USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for stardate -251612.1. I am the Admiral in question, and today we're going to be talking about the concepts of entitlement and privilege as they apply to life aboard the Dauntless. But before we do that, we record these sessions every Tuesday at 12:30 South African Standard Time. If you are an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you're welcome to join us live for these recording sessions in the Screening Room channel in the Dauntless Discord. Admittedly, the middle of the day on a Tuesday is an awkward time, so if you're not able to join us live, you're welcome to watch them back later. We also do our best to stream these to YouTube in real time, so if you're not an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you're welcome to try and catch it there. It seems to be happening now as far as I can tell. If not, we'll upload it later. We'll also do our best to upload it to Facebook later as well, so you can catch it on our Facebook page, although that is becoming increasingly difficult these days as they change the settings on their platform, but that's just how these things go sometimes. All right, so if you have a question or a comment, if you're here live in the chat in Discord, please make sure that you @tag me, right? So @mention me, so that when we get to the Q&A section at the end, I can scroll back up and see which comments or questions are directed at me for my attention, so that I can address them during the appropriate moment. I'll also do my best to respond to any questions or comments that pop up on YouTube. I think I can see those coming through, but that doesn't work all that reliably. So Discord will take priority because, of course, active duty members of the crew have priority here, and everybody else has second option. If you're not able to join us live, that's fine. As I said, you can watch it back later, and you're welcome to drop comments anywhere you find this video. So in the comment section on YouTube or on Facebook. If you would rather not comment publicly, you're welcome to message me privately. Again, Discord, Facebook, YouTube, just about anywhere. You can get a message to me, and I will do my best to address your comment or question there and then. And I might even use it as inspiration for an upcoming briefing with the Admiral video, which would be great. So if you have any topic suggestions, we would love to hear them. But who am I? Who are we? Why are we here? What's the point of all this? The USS Dauntless is a future-focused advocacy and action group that is at its core a Star Trek fan club. We are a chapter of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association, which is the largest organized Star Trek fan group in existence, as far as I'm aware. And SFI, Starfleet International, uses the metaphor of starships to organize its chapters around the world, hundreds of chapters around the world. And we are one of those. So the USS Dauntless is a starship. The starship is obviously not a real ship made of deuterium hull plating and warp nacelles. The ship is a metaphor. It is the ideological and cultural elements that bind us together as a crew. The starship is not a ship. It is the crew, and our ship is based here in Cape Town, South Africa, but we do a lot of our activities online, which means that we end up having members from all over the place, not only here in Cape Town. Let's see. That is all the housekeeping we need to do for now. So let's get into the fraught discussion around entitlement and privilege. Now, these are two words that are thrown around in public discourse quite a lot at the moment. And the first thing you'll find is that when we use these terms in an institutional context like ours, we tend not to use them in the same way that people will use them in online discourse. But let's define what we mean by these terms. So entitlement within a hierarchical organization like Starfleet International and like the Dauntless in particular is the earned permission granted by the organization to act, decide, or to be deferred to based on demonstrated contribution, competence, and reliability over time. It's conditional, reviewable, and tied to responsibility, not to enthusiasm, to tenure, or to personal confidence. Right? Privilege is the practical advantage that flows from earned entitlement. right? It increases your access, your latitude, and the trust that you receive from your crewmates, your colleagues, and your influence within the system in which this operates. It's not symbolic. It shows up in how information flows, how much discretion is allowed, and whose judgment carries weight. So entitlement is what the institution gives you, typically in response to what you have given to the system. Privilege is the benefit that that your entitlement affords you. And these are not the same as entitlement and privilege in conventional usage. So again, entitlement is earned position. It's conditional, performance-based, and revocable. It exists because the system has tested the individual and has decided that they can be trusted with greater authority and latitude. Privilege is the operational advantage, the benefit, not just personal benefit, but professional benefit as well, that flows from that entitlement. It's functional, it's visible in behavior and access, and it's justified by contribution, at least in theory. Both of these definitions are forward-looking, and they answer the question, what can we safely allow this person to do next? When I say we, that means the entire institution. The institution is constantly looking at and evaluating the behavior and performance of every single member within that institution. And people who consistently perform well over time are granted entitlement, which is formalized, and privilege that flows from that entitlement. But this is different from the conventional or online discourse in which the following definitions are used. So entitlement is usually framed as a negative personality trait, as in that's an entitled person, which is the belief that one deserves benefits without earning them. It's treated as inherently illegitimate, selfish, or morally suspect. And privilege is framed as an unearned structural advantage, something that's you just have. You didn't do anything to gain that. It's often tied to things like identity categories rather than individual behavior. It's treated as morally neutral at best, morally tainted at worst, and something that should be acknowledged, mitigated, or dismantled. So both of these are seen as inherently negative traits. And they're backward looking, right? So they're looking at where you are now and what did you do to get this, right? They answer the question, what advantages did this person start with? So within our context, we're looking at both entitlement and privilege as being something that you accrue as you work, that you gain as you go, whereas the conventional discourse treats these concepts as something as starting conditions, right? By way of contrast, let's think about this in a tabletop role-playing game point of view, right? Conventional discourse considers entitlement and privilege as being part of your character sheet when you roll your character at level 1, right? These are things that you have. And despite it being contrary to the intent of most game systems, sometimes the DM will allow you to have an extra ability or an extra capability or some extra cool thing that the other players don't have in your starting conditions. That is what privilege looks like in conventional usage. And entitlement is the inherent feeling that you are deserving of things that you haven't yet earned, right? As opposed to our framing of entitlement and privilege, which again, going back to that tabletop RPG metaphor, once you have spent time running session after session with the same character, you've earned the experience points, you've leveled up your character a bunch of times, the skills and abilities that your character has accrued through leveling, that is your entitlement. And the privilege is the new things that you are then able to achieve through those added skills and abilities that your character has accrued. So same words describe two very different concepts that don't necessarily have much to do with one another. Key differences. Online discourse treats entitlement as psychological. It's a frame of mind. This framework treats it as institutional. So it's something that comes from within the organization. Online discourse treats privilege as inherited, something that's you just get without having to do anything for it. But our framework, our institutional framework, treats it as accumulated, something that you pick up as you go along, something that you earn. Online discourse often collapses power, advantage, and moral worth into one bundle, right? Power, advantage, and moral worth are synonymous in most online discourse. But our framework treats treats them separately, and we frame them rather as authority, trust, and responsibility. And these are things that you demonstrate over time and are then given more latitude to exercise in the institution. Online discourse is concerned with fairness of outcomes, but our framework is concerned with the reliability of the system, right? Our system is composed of people, and we need to be assessing and monitoring and fostering the reliability of the components of those systems, each one of us being a component in the system. So with us, it's about reliability of the system, whereas online discourse is talking about the fairness of outcomes, which is really not something that concerns us at all, really. And why does this clash feel so sharp between these two different framings of these concepts? In online spaces, privilege is something that's to be interrogated or apologized for, right? You're supposed to be embarrassed that you have privilege. But in functional organizations like the Dauntless, privilege is something that is earned. It's exercised carefully and justified daily. And if it's abused or misused, then it's something that you lose, right? It's not something that is yours to possess indefinitely. It's something that is given by the system, by your colleagues, and something that can be taken away. When people import the conventional definitions into an operational hierarchy like ours, they experienced earned authority as injustice. So this often happens with people who are new to institutions, is they look around and they see that some people have rights and privileges that they lack, and they feel like this is inherently unfair because that it's not obvious to them how those more experienced, more senior individuals within the institution obtained that level of authority, that level of privilege, that level of entitlement, because they don't yet understand enough about the system to understand how advancement works, typically, often, in my experience. So that's why it can feel unjust. And then they will start to impose the conventional terms of privilege and entitlement onto those institutional frameworks inappropriately. From the system's point of view, what they're actually encountering is unmet prerequisites. And that's the crux of the mismatch between these two frameworks. One model is moral and sociological, and the other model is practical and risk-based. If you confuse the two, you don't get justice, you get dysfunction. So, entitlement in the Dauntless, and I'm talking about the Dauntless specifically, but the same thing applies perhaps less formally, but it applies to the rest of Starfleet as well, and applies to just about any institution that you might be a part of. When you have any kind of hierarchical institution, these kinds of systems will automatically come into play because without them, the system doesn't function. But we're talking from the Dauntless point of view here. So in the Dauntless, entitlement is not automatic. Entitlement is earned. It's codified. We have systems through which these things can be explicitly articulated. Privilege is the practical expression of that entitlement. So privilege is the way that you use the entitlement that you've earned. And reputation and social capital determine whether that privilege is effective or resented. Social capital is something that we've spoken about in one of these briefings once before. We used the term reputation. Social capital and reputation are effectively synonymous. But I like the term social capital because it describes reputation as a currency that you can earn. You can build up a repository of social capital, of social money, and then you can spend that in order to exercise your privilege. But once you've spent it, it's gone, right? You have to earn it back again. There's an important thing here when it comes to the concept of entitlement specifically, is that there is a non-trivial overlap between how conventional usage of the term entitlement, so that is the psychological entitlement where people feel like they're entitled to things that they haven't earned, and our institutional entitlement, which is earned, explicitly earned access to resources within the organization. And the overlap is where most of the friction comes in with new members. And I've mentioned the new members especially before. So in conventional usage, entitlement describes a psychological state, the feeling that one deserves access or influence or recognition or accommodation without having met the requirements. So this is the attitude where somebody upon entering or seeking to enter Let me use a practical example. Somebody who shows up at a job interview and when asked about the salary expectations, put forward a number which is not really a reasonable number. The interviewer will say, well, we're not prepared to give you that number because we don't yet know if you can do the work that justifies that number. To which the interviewee responds, well, if you give me that number, I'll show you that I can do the work. Now, that's kind of an impasse, right? So you have an emotional impasse. One person is requiring that the other prove their capability before they are rewarded, and the other is requiring the reward before they feel motivated or motivated to do the work necessary to earn it. And that's the kind of confusion that we see here. Although we're not talking about exchange of money, we are talking about exchange of social capital. And new members can feel a little frustrated, I think, when they enter into a hierarchical system and they don't have all the authority and privilege that they feel entitled to. So that definition isn't wrong, right? It just operates at a level of attitude rather than of structure. In the Dauntless context, entitlement is institutional permission that must be earned. Right? The overlap occurs when a member feels entitled before the system had granted entitlement. And that gap, which is between the felt entitlement and earned entitlement, is where problems arise. A new member may sincerely believe things like, my ideas should carry weight. I'm an equal member of this group. I should be consulted on decisions just like everybody else is. I should be treated as an equal, as a peer. And my commitment to the organization and to the institution and to our values should be assumed. And none of these are malicious, right? They're not crazy for thinking this. They're often driven by the new members' enthusiasm, their perception of their identity, or their prior experience in other institutions. Psychologically, that person feels ready in the moment to commit to all of those things. But institutionally, the system needs to verify those things. The institution doesn't know that history or can't take it for granted that the history as presented is accurate. So the system has to verify the new member's reliability, that patterned contribution, which means consistent contribution over time, judgment under correction. So what happens when the member makes an error? How do they respond to being corrected? Alignment with the standards of the institution and that kind of thing. So from the individual's internal narrative, from that new member, with the story they tell themselves, denial of access feels like an injustice, right? They feel like they should be able to do whatever they want within this new organization because they feel really enthusiastic about it. But from the organization's perspective, that's the Dauntless' perspective, granting that level of privilege or that level of entitlement would be an unbacked risk, right? So giving that person access to our Facebook page, for example, to be able to post whatever they want on there on behalf of the Dauntless because they're super excited about it and they've done social media before and they want to do it for us. That sounds like emotionally, it sounds like a good idea, except that we don't yet know if that person can be trusted to say everything about the Dauntless on social media that should be said. And that person needs to spend some time making sure that they are properly aligned with the organization's values and that the organization, not just the command staff, but the whole rest of the Dauntless crew need to learn to know that we can trust and rely on this person to do that work. So this is where the conventional critique of entitlement becomes accurate but incomplete, right? The problem isn't that the person wants more, right? That in itself is not a problem. In fact, that's what we want. We want to encourage that kind of thing. It's that they're attempting to spend that social or institutional capital they don't yet possess. They haven't yet built up the reputation that they need in order to buy that access, right? They don't have enough social capital, social money, social currency in their social bank account to be able to buy that entitlement. So the psychological entitlement is a claim, right? They're staking a claim to what they feel like they deserve, but the earned entitlement is a receipt, right? Once they spend the time to earn that social currency, then they can purchase that entitlement and get a receipt, as it were. When new members push for privileges prematurely, they trigger the same warning signals that classic entitlement behavior does, right? The kind of psychological entitlement that people talk about online. So that's impatience, defensiveness, boundary testing, and the organization doesn't or shouldn't respond by arguing its philosophy. It responds by quietly withholding trust. So all it does is it erodes our trust in that individual rather than inspiring it. And the productive alignment point here is that psychological entitlement can be framed as aspiration. And that's good, right? We want to encourage aspiration. But aspiration becomes legitimate entitlement only through demonstrated contribution, only through effort over time, consistency over time. And once that trust has been earned, once that reputational and social currency has been banked, then that entitlement can be purchased with the currency that has been accrued. When that reframing happens, the friction disappears, right? Once the aspiration matches with the demonstrated contribution, then there's no longer a problem. Now there's no longer a mismatch. And the individual understands that the feeling of I should have more isn't an accusation against the system. It's a signal to do the work that converts desire into entitlement. And that's the thing that we need to get better at communicating to our new members is, yes, we see that you're excited and we see that you have great aspirations. But in order to obtain the privilege that you're hoping to achieve, in order to get the entitlements that you want, you need to put in the work first. Once you've proven to us that you're ready to put in the work, that you're prepared to do what needs to be done, then you'll be granted the entitlements, because then you'll have earned enough social capital to afford them. And that's the overlap between these different definitions. The conventional entitlement describes the emotion of feeling entitlement, and our framework governs the mechanism of granting that entitlement that they feel that they deserve. To confuse the emotion for the mechanism leads to people feeling wronged. They feel like they're faced an injustice. But if that can be brought to understand the mechanism, then the entitlement stops being a flaw and starts to become a goal with a clear path. And that's something that I've spent a lot of time, especially during these briefings, trying to articulate, is map out that path from starting position to a position of privilege and entitlement. So what about earned entitlement? What does that look like in the Dauntless context? We have multiple systems that help to codify earned entitlements. The initial and most obvious one, perhaps, is rank. So this is a concept that we have inherited from the fictional Starfleet, after which we've modeled a lot of our organizational structures. And the fictional Starfleet inherited that from present-day military organizations, specifically the United States Navy. And one of the systems that we have inherited is the concept of rank. Now, our rank, now again, I've done a whole one of these briefings about rank, and I've mentioned it many times, but it's worth remembering that our version of rank is not the same as rank in the military. In the military, your rank dictates what level of authority you have, right? You have to earn your way up the ranks in order to unlock higher levels of authority. Here, that's not how it works. Our version of rank is more a recognition of the work that you've done already. Some would describe it as a reward. I don't think that's the right way of framing it. I like the concept of a receipt, right? So we acknowledge that you've done all that work, and here's your rank to show that you've done it. And what does that work look like? That looks like consistent contribution over time, but it also looks like being a member over time, right? There are multiple paths to rank promotion. If you're willing to wait around long enough, you'll just get promoted eventually. But if you put in a lot of work, you'll earn rank promotion more rapidly. If you are good at reputation management, which is to say you're good at accruing and spending your social capital, will accelerate that process even more. But all of those things require effort and commitment consistently over time, and it's that accrues to the form of rank. So when new members join our organization, they can reliably look to other members that carry higher rank, and they can assume that that person has done the work necessary to earn that rank. Unfortunately, maybe it's not unfortunate, maybe it's fine, but what rank doesn't do is it doesn't tell you what privilege that member has now. It tells you that they have put in a lot of work during the course of their career, but it doesn't tell you what they've done lately. And for that, we have to look at one of our other systems. And here on the Dauntless, the system we use there is the duty station system. So every member on board has a job title. In my case, my job title is commanding officer. And in most people's cases, the job title is linked to what we call a standard position, which it means that it's a title only. There's nothing else behind it. There's no actual job behind that title. All it means is that they are assigned to a department for organizational purposes, and that they are encouraged to chip in and help out whenever they can in whatever way they can. But there is no specific authority or duties allocated to that job title. That is a standard position. Duty stations, again, we've covered this extensively in previous briefings, but just by way of reminder, duty stations are job titles that carry with them a list of duties that are required to be performed. And when a member takes on that duty station, they are making a commitment to the rest of the crew to ensure that that work is done. So what a new member can do is look around the other crew members and see which of them are have higher rank. That rank will give them some information about the history of their career, if not their recent history. But if they look at their duty station, that in theory should tell them how active that member is now. Duty station holders are expected to conform to a certain measure of performance in order to retain that duty station. And we can probably assume that that person is in a position of both entitlement and privilege if they carry a current duty station. But what does that privilege look like, right? So first of all, the entitlement and privilege systems within the Dauntless they exist to reduce friction and speed up decision making, right? The Dauntless isn't a democracy, for example. When a decision needs to be made, people in higher levels of authority, which is people who have greater entitlements, are the ones who are charged with making those decisions. Ultimately, I'm responsible for making all the decisions as commanding officer, but I will consult with members of higher entitlements first for their position and their opinions, typically before I make any major decisions. Because those people have earned the entitlements of greater trust from me and from the rest of the organization, greater latitude. In other words, they are given more autonomy to operate within their own sphere of influence, within their own department or whatever, and then greater influence over members in their departments, right? So this is department heads and other duty station holders. New members, on the other hand, their entitlements are much more limited in scope. A new member is entitled to training. They are entitled to supervision by other members, and they're entitled to patience because it should be expected that they will take time to align with our values, with our standards, with our systems. And this is fair because everybody started out as a new member, and when they were a new member, they were entitled to those things. And then by putting in effort over time, they obtained higher levels of entitlement and higher levels of privilege. So it is fair, but that doesn't mean it's the same. Fairness and sameness are not synonymous. Contribution determines your entitlement, not your enthusiasm. Okay, that's redundant. Let's move on to the next thing. Let's talk about social capital and reputation. So social capital is your accumulated trust. So if you think of social capital as a kind of money, again, it's the money that represents the reputation that you've earned. The more social capital you build up, you fill a sack or a bank account or a chest under your bed or whatever it is you can imagine where you keep your social capital. It is built slowly over time by managing your reputation, garnering trust in people. But it can be spent quickly. Whenever you are making a step upwards in your entitlement, in your privilege, you are spending social currency to make that jump. And you can't spend more social currency than you have earned. And it's going to take time to earn sufficient social currency to make the next jump up. And here's the key, is that every interaction with another member of the crew is either a deposit or a withdrawal in your social capital, right? So if you are providing somebody a positive interaction with you, that is a deposit, right? You're earning social capital with that specific member and then with the rest of the crew as a whole. And when you are spending your social capital to make that advancement, you are withdrawing from it. But also you're making a withdrawal if you root somebody or if you ignore somebody or something like that. Every interaction is either a deposit or a withdrawal. And your social capital determines whose messages get answered, right? It's because, frankly, the higher up the chain of command you go, the more messages you have to process all the time. And when I am in a position of having to prioritize my time when it comes to responding to messages from crew members, I have to prioritize members that have higher entitlement and higher privilege because I know that their messages are going to be more important for the scope of the organization than new members. Right. It's unfortunate that that's the case. I do my best to respond to everybody, but when time comes that I have to prioritize, I'm going to prioritize senior staff over everybody else because I need to hear what my senior staff have to say. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily need to hear what the latest crewman recruit has to say to me. So social capital determines whose messages get answered, whose judgment is trusted. So when I'm asking for people's opinions, I'm not necessarily going to weigh all of those opinions equally. Although I do want to hear everybody's opinions, some opinions will matter more than others. And then who gets the benefit of the doubt when there is a negative interaction between members of the crew, a conflict or something like that. Whoever has more social capital will tend to be given more latitude than the person with less social capital. And that is one of the privileges of having earned that social capital. You earn that trust and you can spend that trust in difficult circumstances in order to buy benefit of the doubt. People who've earned rank over time, perhaps long ago, but have failed to back up, to keep their stocks of social capital high, result in a situation what you might describe as brittle authority. So you can say, well, I have this rank, I have this duty station position, but you don't have enough social capital to back up your requests or demands that you're making of the rest of your team. That's not going to do you in good stead. People are going to have a hard time acquiescing to your requests or following your instructions when you do not have sufficient social capital banked. On the other hand, social capital without rank means that you have influence, but you don't have accountability. And that's not a stable place to be either. So being very friendly, having people owe you a lot of favors, but you're a petty officer first class, that's not going to be all that useful either. So when you are on the track of building up your social capital, it is in the interest of your career advancement to seek out your rank promotion as you go. Sometimes that's just automatic. As you work, you get promoted, but there are certain gates which require specific and explicit work from you in order to advance to the next level. For example, switching from enlisted to officer ranks, you need to complete the OTS, the Officer Training School at Starfleet Academy. Starfleet Fandom Academy is the current name. The only way to make that transition is by completing that exam. Similarly, in the higher officer ranks, to go from lieutenant commander to commander, you have to complete the Officers Command College exam, also at the Starfleet Fandom Academy. So that requires specific and deliberate action from you in order to advance to the next position. But generally speaking, simply being an active and reliable member of the crew will be sufficient to ensure your rank advancement. Let's talk about leveraging your privilege and your social capital together, right? Using your formal privilege that you've earned to protect the trust that you have garnered from the rest of your crew. So one of the ways you can do that is by being careful about, so we have a principle of praise in public, critique in private. This is a great way of doing that, right? So when members of your team are in need of correction, which will happen a lot, especially new members who haven't yet mastered our systems or our policies, by ensuring that you're not embarrassing them when when time comes for correction, and when you issue correction, you do so in private, not in public, that's a great way of protecting your trust, both from that member and from the rest of the team, while using your formal privilege appropriately. You can also use your social capital to extend your influence. So you can bank your social capital and then spend it to shape outcomes beyond your formal remit. So you have a specific duty station, for example, which gives you a specific set of responsibilities over a team or a department or something like that. But if you bank sufficient social capital, you can leverage that to have significant influence in how policy is shaped for the organization as a whole. As I said, I like to consult duty station holders in general and senior staff in particular with every major decision that I hold, so that I have to take. So if you can earn the position of a department head, for example, chief engineering officer, even though your expertise relates specifically to the engineering functions of the ship, the fact that you sit in that chair grants you a certain degree of privilege when it comes to shaping policy of the crew. Now, again, as commanding officer, my word is law and my decision is final, but you will have my ear when it comes to policy decisions. And that is not without value. You can also spend your capital to defend standards, not convenience. In fact, this is how it should be done, right? So if you're going to be spending capital, it should be done so to defend your standards, not your convenience. What does that mean? Let me think of a practical example. Blood donation missions, right? So this is the most important mission that we do. Every 9 weeks, we get together in our various away teams and we go to a nearby blood donation station and we donate blood together. Those are of the crew who are able to do so. Everybody else is expected to attend anyway, because it is both a social team building function as well as a life-saving mission, right? It's both of those things, and it's critically important that everybody attend those things. Spending your social capital to defend the standards, which is to say that something has come up in your day-to-day life and you are not able to attend that mission, right? That would be a withdrawal of your social capital, right? To have to stand in front of the rest of the crew and say, sorry guys, I'm not going to be able to make it this time. That means that your social capital is going to take a hit. But you are defending the standards because you are acknowledging that the dates for those missions are cast in stone, that you are expected to be there, and for whatever reason beyond your control, you are not able to attend. Spending capital to defend convenience in that same circumstance would look different. It would look something like asking the rest of the crew to reschedule that mission to a day that is more convenient for you. Nobody on board, not even me, has sufficient social capital to ask that of the rest of the crew. It's not fair. It's simply not done, right? Rescheduling the mission is not something that we can do. The best we can do is consider that you specifically or some of your team might be able to go on a separate day and still have it count, right? Some away teams actually have this as a standing arrangement out of sheer necessity, because in their specific sectors, blood donation is not possible on the scheduled day for whatever reason. So we have to make accommodations for them. If you are unable to make it on that day, we are open to considering making accommodations for you, but that conversation is going to cost you a fair amount of social capital, because now a fair amount of extra paperwork is needed in order to make that accommodation for you. And if you haven't banked sufficient social capital in order to purchase that, in order to make such a large withdrawal, then the answer is going to be no. We're not going to rearrange our whole schedule around you and your team. So if you're going to ask for special accommodations that match convenience, you need to have a lot of social capital invested. But rather, it's better to spend your social capital to defend the standards, which is that everybody's schedule is respected. It's better to do that rather than to spend it for convenience sake. You can also convert your privilege, the privilege that you've earned, into things like mentorship and sponsorship, right? So the privilege that you've earned is the ability to shape and guide policy, but also shape and guide the people under your command, the members of your team. If you are prepared to take on junior members, take them under your wing and help to guide them through the early stages of their membership, to help them learn our systems, our policies, help them find a place where they can contribute in the crew, give them that personal time and attention, which is beyond most of the senior staff. We just don't have the capacity to do that for every single new member. But if you can spend some of your social capital and invest it in another crew member like that, that is great. And that's the kind of thing that we want to see happen. That's where you leverage your privilege and your social capital together. And that allows you to do the other thing, which is to reinvest your reputation, the reputation that you built, back into the system. And you can then use your reputation to bolster the reputation of this new recruit who you are assisting. But what happens when this breaks down? So what are the failure modes for when this isn't done appropriately? So we've got individual failure modes, right? So when an individual member falls afoul of this whole system and does it wrong, right? Does it suboptimally. Let's think of it that way rather than wrong. What are some examples of that? So here's one. So what about speaking before delivering? So saying something like, I can totally do this thing and I promise that I'm going to do it for everybody. And then not doing so, not showing up on the day, not making good on the promise, not even verifying to see if it was even possible to do it before making the commitment. That's a failure mode. Spending influence before earning it. Now, this is difficult to do, but if you are the sort of person who has the gift of the gab, you can persuade people to listen to you and to follow your advice and to grant you authority that you haven't yet necessarily earned. And that is kind of inappropriate. That's a failure mode because you don't even necessarily know that you're able to meet those expectations. Big one, failure mode is inconsistency in attendance or effort, right? The one thing that we require from everybody is consistency over time. Being present, showing up, doing the thing, especially honoring the commitments that you've made. And if you are inconsistent, if you're unreliable, then that every instance where you fail to hold up your end of the bargain is going to cost you social capital. And eventually people will learn that they can't rely on you, that they can't trust you to do the things that you've committed to do. And your social capital account will be empty. That's a big time failure mode. Another one which can be difficult for people who are perhaps less socially skilled, but is important to work on, is the notion of confusing tolerance with trust. So when somebody puts up with you as opposed to actually trusting you with your authority, with the work that they're doing, right? So let's say you're a junior member, you're working on a team, and your team leader is willing to listen to all of your ideas and your suggestions for how things should be improved. That doesn't mean that they're trusting you to do that work. The trust is something that needs to be earned over time. You still need to put in that work. I'm sure they want to hear it. I'm sure they want to they want to know that you are enthusiastic, but that tolerating your enthusiasm is not the same as trusting you to do the work. Another failure mode is publicly litigating correction. So in theory, this should be less likely to occur when everybody sticks to the rule of praise in public and critique in private, right? So when you've done something cool, that should be announced publicly. When you've done something suboptimal, that should be dealt with in private. But if you decide to take a private correction that you've received from your team leader or someone else in authority, and you make it public, and you yammer on about it in an open Discord channel or something like that, that is going to look very bad for you, and that is a failure mode. Another mistake people will make is that they will treat past contribution as permanent credit, right? So yes, you were very active 6 years ago, and you were super attentive to all of the missions, and you got your uniform shiny and new, and all of that was really cool. But then you kind of disappeared and haven't shown up at a mission since then. All of that social capital that you backed back then has been eroded away, and now it's back down to zero. So even though you were super active in the past, it doesn't mean that you still have that social capital banked. Now you've spent it all. That's a failure mode. Okay, we've actually already discussed those things. Let's move on to that. So what are the consequences of spending all your social capital, of these individual failure modes? Now, these are things that are unlikely to ever be formally announced, right? Nobody's going to tell you, no one's going to send you an email probably telling you that these things have happened, but you will probably start to notice that this has happened if you've misspent your social capital. First thing is that you will be invisibly deprioritized, right? So people are going to be less likely to consult your opinion. They're not going to ask for your availability. They're just going to schedule stuff without you. They're not going to respond to your messages as quickly or at all because they don't really want to consult with you, because they've learned that they can't rely on you. You will lose the benefit of the doubt. If there is a negative interaction between you and another member of the crew, for example, if the other person is given the benefit of the doubt and you aren't, that might be an indication that you have spent your social capital inappropriately. Another example is that you might have a really high formal rank, so you've got lots of pips on your collar, but nobody listens to you. You have zero influence, right? That's an indication that you've misspent your social capital. Your advancement stalls. You hit a particular rank or a particular duty station, and even though you feel like you have on paper earned your eligibility for promotion to the next rank or the next duty station above that, that doesn't happen despite putting in requests, despite querying and all of that kind of thing. Your advancement has stalled. That is an indication that you may have misspent your social capital. If decisions root around you, especially when it comes to things that are relevant to your sphere of influence, so if you are in the communications department and you are not being involved in communications conversations, that may be an indication that you have misspent your social capital. People aren't involving you in the conversation because, frankly, they don't want to hear your position. All right, but what does high trust behavior look like, right? How do you repair that? How do you resolve that low trust situation? All those failure modes. What do you do to rebuild your stock of social capital? How do you get back to a position where people are listening to you, they're interested in you, and they want to give you both entitlement and privilege? First thing, reliability before visibility, right? People will notice if you're reliable. If you're the one who's always there, if you're the one who's always on time, if your uniform is always clean and pressed, all that kind of thing, people will notice. Even if you're not making a fuss about it, even if you're not being the loudest person in the room, you're not even necessarily speaking up in every meeting, the fact that you're there, the fact that you are consistently present, that is a big green flag, especially in an organization like the Dauntless, because attendance is taken at every single mission. And if your attendance is higher than everybody else's, we will notice. And that goes a long way. If you are quietly competent, right? If you're doing the things that you said you were going to do and you do them well, people will notice that too. Again, you don't necessarily have to be flashy about it. You don't have to be making a fuss about it. But if you're committing to things and you're doing the things you commit to, wow, massive green flag. That will have the social capital roaring in. If you have a clean acceptance of correction, that's a pretty good signal too, right? So you make an error, you do the wrong thing, and somebody points it out to you, and you say, "Oh, thank you for letting me know. I'll do my best. I'll do better next time, or I'll try to avoid doing that in the future," or something like that. A nice, clean acceptance of correction. Chef's kiss. Fantastic. That's what we want to see. Of course, if you feel like you were justified in making the decision, you're absolutely entitled to argue the point. But if you're wrong and you know you were wrong, accepting that cleanly, fantastic. That's what we want to see. Using privilege to stabilize the mission, right? So what the privilege that you have, however great or however small that might be, using that to improve the situation for everybody, right? So using your influence, for example, to persuade another member of your team to join us for an away mission, fantastic. That's what we want to see. It shouldn't be only on the mission commander or on the command staff or the senior staff or the department head to have to beg and plead with every single member to have to show up for the mission. If you see that your partner in your team hasn't RSVP'd for the mission yet, give them a poke, elbow them and say, "Listen, don't you want to, we'll see you there," that kind of thing. If you use whatever privilege you have to stabilize the mission, people will notice that too. and then making others' jobs easier. Fantastic, right? If you see that a piece of work needs to be done and the person who has been assigned to that work is struggling to get to it, if you can do something to make that person's job easier, that person will notice and they will pass that information along. That will garner you a significant amount of social capital. So those are there's plenty of other things you can do. And in fact, we did a whole briefing like this on reputational management, reputational repair. I forget what we called it, but it was basically that. What to do if you've messed it up and how can you manage your own reputation. But those are some good examples of things that you can do. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that there. So let's just wrap up what we've talked about here because we're almost at an hour. Entitlement, again, within our context, is earned permission, right? It's something that you accrue over time, and it's earned by being consistent, putting in the work. Privilege is the practical expression of the entitlement that you've earned, right? So you earn certain entitlements, which gives you authority, gives you privilege, gives you access, and then gives you authority and access. Yeah, privilege is how you use that authority and access. Social capital is the currency that makes that work, right? You buy and spend social currency in order to get the work done, both to purchase entitlement and when you're executing your privilege. And reputation is the ledger that ties those things together, right? Reputation is where you see how well you're doing in other people's eyes, and your in and outflow of social capital is the measurement of your reputation. If you mismanage any one of these, and the others won't save you, right? You need to be on top of all four of them. If you align them, and then the system is working exactly as intended. All right. Let's see if we have any questions or comments. I see the chat has been fairly active. Anything tagging me? No, but my yeoman did submit a few questions beforehand, so let's go through those. First, so are new members basically expected to keep quiet? No. They're expected to listen first and contribute in proportion to experience. So input is welcome. We always want to hear fresh ideas. We want to see how enthusiastic you are, but your influence is earned, right? So this reminds me of a concept that's quite important both in the fictional Starfleet and here in the real Starfleet. Your idea, your project, right? So although we love to hear enthusiastic contributions from new members, people who have new ideas, what we too rarely see from new members is the willingness to put in the work to execute the project. So, hey, I've got this cool idea. We should do this. Okay, cool. Please go ahead and do it. Nothing happens, right? That's the thing that often happens from new members, and that's not what we want to see. So new members should be mindful that we want to see the effort behind the enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, good. Effort, even better, right? Speaking isn't the issue. The weight the words carry is the issue. New voices add data, but they don't add direction until they've demonstrated reliability. We want to see the work behind your enthusiasm. Next question. Isn't this just hierarchy protecting itself? Okay, all right, fair enough. My yeoman's a little bit spicy today. Only if advancement is automatic, right? Only if things are just going if you're just sitting in a chair for 5 years and then you're automatically promoted to the next rank, right? That's not how things happen here. In the Dauntless, especially, privilege is tied to your contribution and the review of the contribution that you make. A hierarchy that doesn't reward the work collapses, right? It's unsustainable. And one that rewards longevity alone, so just time and grade, for example, if it's only rewarding that, it's going to rot away because then nobody's incentivized to actually put in the work. The system exists to protect the standards, not the egos of the members in that system. What if someone has rank but no social capital? Right, so this can happen if somebody has earned rank in the past but has stepped away from active engagement, and all of the social capital that they earned that got them that rank in the first place has since eroded away. That's typically how that happens. Then that person has authority on paper, but will experience friction in practice. If that person decides to step back in one day and start throwing their weight around and making requests and issuing orders and that kind of thing, it's not going to fly very well, right? Orders might be followed. Orders. It's worth noting that within our context, orders are requests. We use the term orders as a metaphor more than anything else, but nobody is obliged to follow anybody's orders. It doesn't work like that here. Orders might be followed, but influence will be minimal, right? People aren't necessarily going to listen to that person. And that's not a punishment, right? You shouldn't be punished for real life getting in the way. You had to take a step back and now you're stepping back up again. But it is risk management, right? Rank opens doors, but it's trust, the trust that comes with social capital management that determines whether people walk through the door with you. So how do I know if I'm losing social capital? It's not going to be obvious. No one's going to message you and tell you that. Well, hopefully somebody would, but it's unlikely. But there will be signs, right? You'll stop being consulted early. People aren't going to message you and ask you for your opinion. When you message seniors, it's going to take longer and longer for you to get a response to your messages. Discussions will happen without you. You won't be invited to the meeting. No one's going to announce it. Nobody's going to mark it on your file necessarily. It's just a gradual cooling, right? You'll notice that people will be slower to invoke you when it comes to places where decisions are made. By the time it's obvious to you or to anybody else, the damage has already been done, and you're going to have to do some work to restore that social currency. Can social capital recover once it's damaged? Yes, it can. But you can't do it by arguing or by explaining or by making excuses. That's not going to do it. If anything, that's just going to make it worse, right? Recovery and regaining that social capital happens through consistent delivery, showing up, being there, doing the work, honoring the commitments. Clean acceptance of correction is a pretty important one. So when somebody points out that you've done a thing and you did do that thing, saying, okay, I'll try better next time. That's the right way to respond to that. And then time. Time is the key, right? So those things need to happen consistently over time in order for you to slowly rebuild that social currency. Remember, so social currency is earned slowly, spent quickly. Slowly, time, it needs to be done consistently. Reputation is built the same way, right? Social currency is what tracks your reputation. It's built the first time, quietly, predictably, and without asking for credit. All right. Anything else in there? No. Okay. All right. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. Privilege is not a reward for enthusiasm, and influence is not guaranteed by rank. Do the work, build trust, and the system will back you. Skip either of those, and it quietly won't. Thank you. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out. The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes